Ladies and gentlemen, welcome into the very first edition of the Daly Knockdown. I am your host, Michael Daly, and on a weekly basis, we're going to be talking about the latest in boxing. For this week, let's start off with Danny Garcia's majority decision win over Jose Benavidez Jr. That was an impressive showing for Garcia, a man who had not fought since December 2020. He made his boxing debut at 154 pounds. It was a great night for Danny Garcia, fighting in his home, away from home, at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. He faced somebody who isn't a true 154-pounder. Jose Benavidez made his bones in boxing as a welterweight, but Jose Benavidez most recently fought at 158 pounds before Saturday night's fight. So Garcia was fighting a bigger man. And that size difference did not matter whatsoever. Danny Garcia, his hands looked very quick. He was able to move in and out of the pocket. His power, I think, carried over to the 154-pound division, the junior middleweight division. I thought he looked explosive. That overhand right had serious power on it. Now, not enough to drop Benavidez or knock him down or stop him, but it was enough for him to win points on the scorecards. And we'll get into the scorecards because they were a little interesting, but he did enough to win. Everyone talks about Danny Garcia's left hook. It is phenomenal. But his counterpunching, I think, won him that fight. And again, that overhand right, everyone talks about that left hook. That overhand right was terrific. That overhand right, I think, was able to neutralize Benavidez to the point where Benavidez would rally. For example, in the ninth round, he had a solid ninth round where it seemed like he was winning that round, and then he just stops. And I think he was stopping because he knew the power, he knew the triple jabs that were coming his way from Garcia were nothing to play with. And I think ultimately, he gained a lot of respect for Danny Garcia because he saw how good Danny Garcia was as a 140-pounder, as a 147-pounder. Danny Garcia is the truth. There's a reason why, in his 12-round fights, he lost to Keith Thurman, Sean Porter, and Errol Spence. Those are not names to be ashamed of losing to. They're not. But he just fell a little short. Those were very competitive fights. Ultimately, you saw on Saturday night how good Danny Garcia was. And you saw how good he will be in this division. This is a very good division for him, the junior middleweight division. I'm excited to see what's next for him. But before we talk about what's next for Danny Garcia, we have to talk about this majority decision. This majority decision bothers me because ultimately the right guy won the fight. Danny Garcia won the fight, and I'm happy about that. But for this to be a 114 draw, I'm sorry. What are we doing here? At most, Jose Benavidez won 2 or 3 rounds. At most. That ninth round, you could give it to him. Maybe one of the first 3 rounds, you could also give that to him. But outside of that, what did Jose Benavidez show you to say, oh yeah, this was a really, really, really close fight? Nothing. He showed you nothing to make it seem as if this was worthy of a draw. Now, if you wanted to make it 116, 112, like one of the other scorecards had it, fine. I didn't see it that way, but I won't debate you. Even 115, 113, if you really saw it as a close fight, see it as that. But to say that Danny Garcia did not win that fight, it bothers me because you can't really get criticized for it as a judge because the right man won. But you messed up. That was not a draw. That was not a close fight. I'm sorry. That was not a close fight. Danny Garcia should have won. Unanimous decision. And you robbed the man of a unanimous decision. in a new weight class. He wanted a standout victory, and he really didn't get it because of a judge. That's not right. It is not right. Now, speaking of things that are not right, we're going to stay with this card from Saturday night and talk about Gary Antoine Russell's controversial stoppage over Rances Barthelemy. Do I think the stoppage was early? Yes, I think it was an early stoppage. But I'm not as outraged as I feel like other people were, especially Rances Barthelemy's corner. And they have every right to feel that way because if you are training a former champion, you are led to believe that the referee will give your fighter every chance to prove himself that he is able to continue fighting, especially a former champion. Referees always give the champion the benefit of the doubt. Okay, they're still ready. But it is a bit of a balancing act because at the end of the day, that former champion is still a fighter. And the referee's job is to protect that fighter if the fighter can't protect himself. And Gary Antoine Russell, you have to give him credit. He was in control of that fight. Yes, it was a competitive fight, but he was in control. He switched stances to a southpaw, dropped Barthelemy. And I have to agree with Russell, what he said in his post-fight interview. Had that fight gone on any further, the damage would have been greater. I totally agree with Gary Russell. I definitely think those shots would have been increasingly more punishing. I think it would have been worse off for Barthelemy. But on the other hand, though, I do think Barthelemy should have been given another chance to keep fighting. You know, it's awful to have a fight being taken away from somebody when A, the fight is competitive, and B, that fighter isn't out of it. Rances Barthelemy, yeah, he was knocked down, but he got up right away. He was coherent, and he was ready to continue. And you could see that he was contesting the stoppage right away. He was saying, no, 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 no. This fight needs to continue. But unfortunately for Barthelemy, it just wasn't his night, and it wasn't up to him as to whether the fight could continue going on. But I say all that to say, Gary Russell, that man is the truth. Gary Antoine Russell, and of course his older brother, Gary Russell, he is the truth. It was his first fight since his father passed, a lot weighing on his heart, a lot weighing on his mind, and it did not matter. He pulled through. He was able to overcome, you could argue, the biggest adversity of his life, of his career to this point, and he came out on top. I am very much so looking forward to see what's next in store for Gary Antoine Russell. That guy is outstanding, and he's going to be the face of boxing. And I think it helps, too, that he's in a heavier weight class than his brother Gary Russell, because I just believe that 120-pounders, 126-pounders don't get the respect they deserve. But fighting at 140, oh, you're going to get the respect you deserve, especially if you stop fighting there and you move up in weight at some point in time in your career to 147. Gary Antoine Russell, he will get the eyeballs and the respect that he deserves every time he fights. Next week, next Saturday, Jake Paul was set to fight Paul-Hasim Rahman Jr. at Madison Square Garden. That was a fight that I don't think a ton of people were as interested in it as they would have been if it was a Jake Paul-Tommy Fury fight. But people were interested to see how Jake Paul would fare against a real boxer. Because Paul-Hasim Rahman Jr. is no YouTuber. He's no mixed martial artist. He is a tried and true heavyweight. But unfortunately, that fight was canceled because Paul-Hasim Rahman Jr. is a heavyweight who had to drop down to at least 205 pounds to fight as a cruiserweight against Jake Paul. Jake Paul, the New York State Athletic Commission, they felt that Paul-Hasim Rahman Jr. was not doing enough to get down to 200 pounds or 205 pounds. He just wasn't doing enough. And if I'm Jake Paul, I can't really fault you or the New York State Athletic Commission for calling this fight off, because at the end of the day, you don't want to fight a heavyweight. And if it is in your contract that by a certain point you need to be at a certain weight to show that you're going to be on par for the weigh-ins come August 5th, and you're not doing that, then cancel the fight then. Because clearly, Hasim Rahman Jr. wasn't going to make the weight, or at least he wasn't going to make the weight in a healthy manner, and the fight shouldn't go on. Now, what's next for Jake Paul? Do you try to schedule another fight with Hasim Rahman Jr.? I say no. I don't think you should. What I think should happen, you got to try to find a fight with Tommy Fury. I think that is the end goal here. And the reason why is because not only is Tommy Fury a quote-unquote real boxer, Tommy Fury will give you a lot of interest from a pay-per-view standpoint. I don't know if that fight will ever be able to be made in the United States. Probably not. But if it means Jake having to travel over to the United Kingdom or somewhere in Europe or somewhere else around the world, then you do that if it pays off from a pay-per-view standpoint. It might be hard with the different time zones and Showtime airing a pay-per-view at 3 p.m. Eastern time on a Saturday. Those are all things to work out. But in terms of interest, you're going to have a lot of interest with Tommy Fury. And you can make that fight happen if it is overseas. So that is something that I would like to see. I think a lot of people would still like to see. Yes, the fight, I do think to a certain extent, is a little bit snake bitten. I do think it is. But I am very much so interested in seeing if Jake Paul can beat a real boxer. Could he have bitten off a little bit more than he could chew against Hasim Rahman? I think so. I think that would have been a very, very tough test for him. But I also think Jake knew what he was doing by making that a cruiserweight fight. Hasim Rahman Jr. is a heavyweight. He's not a cruiserweight. And there's a reason why Hasim was having difficulties dropping down, because he's not a 200-pounder. The guy fought his last fight in the spring at 225 pounds. So now you got to dial it all the way down to 200 pounds. That's a lot to ask for. That is tough for Hasim Rahman Jr. Who knows if they'll ever fight again? I don't think so. I think Jake Paul is ready to move on. I feel for Jake Paul. I feel for all of the fighters. Amanda Serrano. It was a pretty solid undercard as well. That fight completely scrapped for next week. A fight for next week, though, next Saturday, that is still on as of now. Michael Mick Conlan taking on Miguel Marriaga in Belfast. Michael Conlan came off of a massive loss in his career to Leigh Wood. Losing to Leigh Wood in that devastating fashion, getting knocked out of the ring, getting knocked out, it's not good for him. But he is on a path to prove that that was just a one-off. That was an anomaly. He can be a world champion again. He is the real deal. And I believe Michael Conlan. I think Michael Conlan is that guy, but he will have a tough test on his hands with Miguel Marriaga. Miguel Marriaga is no slouch. He's been in there with Oscar Valdez, Vasily Lomachenko, Joet Gonzalez, and several other notable fighters. Miguel Marriaga is the real deal, but I do think it will help Michael Conlan fighting in his backyard, fighting someone who I do not deem to be as good as Leigh Wood was. Leigh Wood was a very, very solid fighter. Miguel Marriaga, a tough challenger, a tough opponent, but I don't think championship material. And Miguel Marriaga in 2017, back-to-back, fought Valdez and Lomachenko. And a few years before then, he fought Nicholas Walters. So he's been in there with the best of the best, especially when he fought them. At that time, they were amazing fighters. But now, it is Michael Conlan's time to prove that he can be a world champion again. And I think he can, but what he has to do, he has to work on that defense, because especially up against the ropes, you cannot afford to get knocked down, because you might get stopped again. And if that were to happen, that would be very unfortunate for his career. His career, that would be a major, major setback for Michael Conlan at this point in time. So We'll see how that one will fare. And another fight that is taking place that I am very curious to see how it unfolds. Vergil Ortiz, he is taking on in Texas Michael McKinson. McKinson, undefeated, the son of a former boxer. That will be a solid test for Vergil Ortiz. But Vergil Ortiz, I think, is a burgeoning star in the welterweight division. Vergil Ortiz right now, you could make the argument, is the most important fighter in Golden Boy Promotions. Golden Boy needs Vergil Ortiz to get a win. I think he will. Michael McKinson is a good fighter, but I don't think he's good enough to beat Vergil Ortiz. I think Vergil Ortiz actually gets a stoppage. Yes, Vergil Ortiz is coming off of a year layoff or so, but he is a very good fighter. And if you can beat someone like Aegis Kavalouskis, which is what he did in his last time out, stopped Kavalouskis, I think you could stop Michael McKinson. And Vergil Ortiz, who knows what's in store for him? Could he fight someone down the line like Jaron Boots Ennis? Could he fight Errol Spence Jr.? That would be a massive fight in the state of Texas. Putting that at AT&T Stadium in Arlington, that would be a big draw. But I don't think Vergil Ortiz is there yet. I think he's got to fight for a world title. I think he's got to be a champion, but he's knocking on that door. You know, he's 24 years old right now. He is well respected in the welterweight division and in boxing. If you can beat Aegis Kavalouskis, who fought previously Terrence Crawford, you stopped Kavalouskis, and then somehow you can beat Michael McKinson, I think you're working your way up to fight a world champion. It will be difficult, though, because of the different promotions, being with Golden Boy and other fighters being with PBC and Top Rank. I get it. It's hard. But if you can make that happen for Vergil Ortiz, I think it will only benefit his career. That is going to wrap up this latest edition of the Daly Knockdown. We're coming at you every single week with the latest and greatest in boxing. That's all for now. I'm Michael Daly saying so long. Take care. Peace.